Hey, my relatives, this is Mark Charles. It is Friday, July 30th, about 3:20 in the afternoon here on the East Coast. And I'm going to be starting my book study. We are going through the book I co-authored, Unsettling Truth, the ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. And today we are covering chapter 10, which is titled Abraham Lincoln and Native Genocide. Before I begin, as I always do, I want to welcome those who are joining me. Thank you for taking time to be with me this afternoon. And I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from what is now known as Washington, D.C., but these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of it and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. You'll notice I'm in a bit of a new environment. We've kind of changed things around in our house. My wife is working full-time from home, and so we set up an office for her that she can work out of. And I was doing my live streams in kind of a den that we have down in the basement, but I had to tear it down and set it up every day because we use it as a common family space as well. And that just got a little tiring. So I set up a new kind of studio place in the corner of our house. And I have, like most Zoom people are live streamers, I have a few books that I've read. I have a few props. Of course, I have my bluebird flower mug and my Navajo basket. And I'm trying to get a little more comfortable in this space of the house. I hope it's going to end up working out well. So I'm going to take my book here, and this is the book that we are looking at today. The other books I have over here, one other book I want to make sure I highlight is The Land is Not Empty, and this is written by Sarah Augustine, another fantastic book on the Doctrine of Discovery. I'm actually hoping to have her on one of my second cups of coffee in the next week or two. I've reached out to her and asked if she would join me one day for a cup of coffee that we could live stream and have a discussion about. So I was honored to write the foreword for her book, and I really hope that a lot of people read it and wrestle with the things that Sarah brings forward in her book. And hopefully, like I said, we'll have her on a live stream in a few weeks or so and be able to discuss the book more in depth. Today, we're going through chapter 10, and last week we went through chapter 9. This week we're going through chapter 10, which are some of the hardest chapters in the entire book, because these chapters deconstruct very intentionally the mythological legacy of Abraham Lincoln. And we begin to wrestle with what he actually did, what he actually wrote, what he actually believed, not the things we like to say he was about, things he actually did. And they are two very different things. Last week, we began with the story of Oscar Groening and Robert McNamara, showed how both of them were kind of clogged machine. Oscar Groening working for the Nazi regime, and Robert McNamara serving under General LeMay in the U.S. Army. And both sides were committing genocide, right? The Nazis were committing genocide against Native peoples, or against Jewish people, I'm sorry. And the Americans were firebombing and wreaking havoc on hundreds of thousands of Japanese people as we bombed, not only nuclearly, but with just traditional bombs. And Robert McNamara acknowledged, as did General LeMay, that if we lost the war, they would be tried as war criminals. They didn't lose the war, they won it. And so they were hailed as war heroes. Meanwhile, Oscar Groening, who was an accountant in the Nazi army, he was later tried and then convicted of accessory to 300,000 deaths, and he died basically a condemned war criminal. The only difference between the two is not right or wrong, moral or immoral, just or unjust. The difference between the two is whose side to win the war. Nazi Germany lost, and so they did not get to write their own history, and so the narrative came out of the evils that they had, which are very true and accurate. Robert McNamara's side won, and so the history of the U.S. was much more mythological, and he was hailed as a war hero. And so, yeah, this is the problem with winning wars. This is one of the challenges we face as a nation, the United States of America, is we've never lost a war that matters. So we've written our own history for hundreds of years. And this is very dangerous because we create mythologies. Last week, chapter 9, we looked very closely at Abraham Lincoln's white supremacist attitudes. We looked at quotes of his from the Lincoln-Douglas debates, quotes of him during his presidency, blatantly stating that he doesn't give a crap about Black lives, that he believes in white supremacy, that he has no intention of making voters or jurors of Black people or allowing them to intermarry or to vote. And he absolutely proclaims and advances the lie of white supremacy. And we wrestled with that. We talked about that. We talked about how he didn't even abolish slavery, but he essentially protected it constitutionally and institutionally through the 13th Amendment, which doesn't abolish it, but redefines and codifies it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And this is one of the reasons why we hail him as a hero today, because he literally has given Abraham Lincoln and Bill Clinton, he's given white landowning men from both parties the tools they've needed to keep people marginalized. And they've done it very effectively. We incarcerate our people at the highest rate of any country in the world. We incarcerate people of color at rates of 3 to 5 times we incarcerate white people. So Abraham Lincoln's hailed a hero because he gave us the tools to continue to oppress people of color, that we're using these tools even today. Now, the chapter we're looking at today is even harder for people to digest because most people have some sort of inkling that Abraham Lincoln was white supremacist, or just at least believed at some point in his life in white supremacy. Most people are aware that his quotes in the Lincoln-Douglas debates are not very good. They've never read them. They don't know what they say. But they're aware that he went through a progression. They don't know the fullness of what he was doing and how he wasn't actually coming to value Black lives, but he was more just getting better at hiding or making implicit white supremacy. But they know that he had some of those tendencies. And so it's not a complete shock. Well, it is a shock, but it's not an absolute out of the blue shock to learn what he believed and what he said and what he stated. The genocide is an entirely different matter because most people are clueless at how genocidal Abraham Lincoln was. Just when I bring this up, they have no mental preparation. They have no educational preparation to even begin to have a category that Abraham Lincoln was committing genocide against Native peoples. Maybe they've heard of the Dakota 38. Maybe that might be one area where they've been aware of a few things, but they don't understand it near the fullness of what he's done. And so in this chapter, we go through 3 of the primary massacres that he was involved in and ethnic cleansings that he was involved in. First, our first section, we start, and I won't go through the history of all this. This is all in the book. We go through the Dakota 38 and the removal of the Dakota and the Winnebago and other nations from the state of Minnesota. We go through some of the history of that. We talk about what he was doing with the trials, and then how he basically removes all protections, breaks the treaties, and removes them from the lands in a very harsh, violent, and even ethnic cleansing way. Puts them on lands that isn't even intended to sustain them. And that results in the death of many of them. And we go through that in the first section. The second section is titled The Long Walk and American Death Camps. And we get a little more blatant in this section because the death camps, again, are something we attribute to Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Right? This is the concentration camps. They literally were mass killing hundreds of thousands of people throughout the course of the war. And most people don't associate what we do as a nation with death camps. But we introduce it that Abraham Lincoln created this reservation. He called it a reservation. I would call it a death camp. Marched 10,000 Navajo and Apache people down there after ethnically cleansing us from our land and destroying our farms and destroying our livestock and burning our homes, killing our people. Marched us down there and then kept us in prison there. And a quarter of our people died. For them, it literally was their death camp. And in fact, we were still imprisoned in there in Bosque Redondo when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. When I lecture, one of the things I say frequently about this is just to help people understand how to think about this differently is I use the phrase that Abraham Lincoln is one of the most genocidal and ethnic cleansing presidents in our nation's history. And then as a twist, I add that I can only imagine how many Native lives were saved because he was assassinated in 1865, right? We often view his assassination as a tragic thing. He was freeing slaves. He was building equality. He was advocating for the rights of the marginalized, is the myth. And we view his death as a tragedy. And I reframe that as no, he was actively committing genocide when he was assassinated. So we have to ask the question, how many lives were saved because he was killed? Now, unfortunately, the presidents after him weren't a lot better in regards to what they were doing with Native peoples and the removal of natives from the lands. But we have to think about it from that perspective. And we really try to get people to begin to think that way within the section on the Long Walk and the American death camps. One of the things just last week, 2 weeks ago, I was down in Mescalero Apache lands, kind of in southeast New Mexico, near the Texas border. And the Apache were actually put in Bosque Redondo. They were in these camps with us Navajo people as well. One of the differences is because they were from a slightly different area and they were a bit more regional to where we were removed to, they were able to escape and hide out in the mountains, and they were not kept in prison nearly as long as the Navajo. I was hoping to actually go to the museum and learn more about that history firsthand while I was there, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the person who ran the museum was no longer available, that museum had been closed and I wasn't able to go see it. But it was interesting even just hearing from people about some of what, just even reference of what they had done and how they had escaped from some of those camps from Bosque Redondo. But they were a part of that legacy as well. And then after the Long Walk and the American death camps, it's in 1864 that we have the massacre at Sand Creek. And the massacre at Sand Creek is committed against the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. And their families, women and children mostly, were killed in this massacre. The men, the warriors were out hunting actually when the massacre began, and save the women and children and the elders who were massacred. And then, of course, there's the reports that the soldiers were literally parading the genitalia of the Native peoples, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, down the streets of Denver. That's how they were celebrating this massacre. And so, yeah, we introduced that. And again, we're building a case here about how there is a systemic ethnic cleansing going on during the Lincoln administration. Now, these were the 3 massacres that we included in the book. I knew there were more, and I had read ones. I couldn't find any others that were during the time period. I wasn't necessarily looking either, but nothing jumped out at me about a massacre that occurred as well, another one during the Lincoln era. And about a year ago, I was doing some research. I don't remember why, but I was maybe even less than a year ago, half a year ago, I was doing some research and I was just looking up massacres again. It might have even been around President's Day. I tend to look things up about these issues in December, January, and February because this is A, when a lot of these events happened, but B, because we celebrate Lincoln in February and the presidents, I'm more aware of these injustices. But I was researching it and I found references to what's called the Bear River Massacre. And I'm doing some research on the Bear River Massacre, and I'm going to share some of these in the comments. So one of the first resources I found was the Smithsonian magazine. And in that this article, they basically go through this massacre. I think I've covered this during one of my second cups of coffee. And so I'm going to share another one that has a bit more of a succinct accounting of the massacre. It's from a website called Utah Humanities, and it's just the Bear River Massacre. It has both a short video, as well as the transcript of the video. And I'm going to share that as well with you. And I just want to read some of what's in that video. So it says, in the early cold morning of January 29, 1863, between 270 and 400 Shoshone men, women, and children were killed by the U.S. Army near present-day Preston, Idaho. This was the largest number of victims in any Indian massacre west of the Mississippi. But because it happened during the Civil War, the event got little attention. Mormon settlers began coming to Cache Valley in the 50s, forcing the northwestern Shoshone people into drier areas which could not support them. A number of Indian raids on settlers and on supply trains headed from Montana had the settlers ask the Army for help in 1862. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor, in command of the 3rd California Volunteer Infantry Regiment and charged with protecting the overland mail route, responded. He was convinced that Chief Bear Hunter's band camped on Beaver Creek was responsible for a number of murders and stolen goods. He thus felt justified in attacking the group. The first assault in the early morning darkness was a direct charge on the village. The Indians had expected some kind of attack and had prepared by digging into the riverbanks. They were successful in defending the village at first, but after Connor ordered some of his men to flank the camp, and after the Indians ran out of ammunition, the tide turned. Soldiers overran the village, burning lodges and killing everyone in their path. Rape and murder of women and children followed. 23 Army soldiers were killed in action. The Bear River Massacre was the effective turning point in Indian-white relations in northern Utah and resulted in the opening of more land for settlement. I found it referenced in numerous sites that this was most likely the largest massacre, even larger, Sand Creek and even Wounded Knee. Up to 400 people were killed in this massacre, maybe more. And we never hear about it. It never gets spoken about. I want to share more reference with you, just another perspective on this. It's from a station, I think it's a radio or maybe a TV station in the area, KUER, and this is called The Forgotten. Let me share this. The Forgotten Shoshone Massacre story will soon be told on a grand scale, and it's about efforts underway to kind of build the memorial and make this massacre more public. Now, throughout my understanding, and I shared last week about how I kind of learned about Abraham Lincoln's white supremacist attitudes. And I shared about how I kind of came across his writings, both at the Lincoln Memorial as well as in the Lincoln Douglas debates. And I had to wrestle through some of those. The same thing happened for me with his genocide. Right? I had known about the Dakota 38. I knew that story. I knew Abraham Lincoln had ordered those deaths. I knew that he had changed the sentencing and had not ordered retrials. I was aware of those stories. And I knew that he was not worthy of the mythology that had been built up around him with his value for life and his belief in equality and all that other kind of BS that we talk about him with. But I had no preparation for what was beyond that. And I remember, I even knew about these massacres. I had known about the Long Walk. Obviously, that's my own history of my own people. I had known about Sand Creek. And it was on a day when it was President's Day, when I was in the middle of kind of going through all of this white supremacy stuff and Abraham Lincoln. And I was going to kind of, I was asked by the Poor People's Campaign to speak at one of their events, and saying, I thought, well, I'm going to debunk the myth of Abraham Lincoln. I have 2 minutes on stage. I'm going to do my best to deconstruct his mythology. And I was sitting downstairs. I think I shared this last week even. I was just thinking about what I was going to say. I wasn't reading anything or learning anything new. And because the veil had begun to get pulled back regarding his white supremacy, it suddenly dawned on me that he was the person responsible for the Long Walk. That happened in 1864. And I just sat there in disbelief. Oh my gosh, Abraham Lincoln. It was his policies. It was his legacy of the Long Walk and of Sand Creek. And I was like, what was he thinking? What is he doing? Again, you don't tend to think of genocide and Abraham Lincoln in the same sentence, especially if you were educated here in the United States. And there were a few turning points for me in understanding this. I actually began to Google and try to understand who had been writing about the genocidal tendencies of Abraham Lincoln, and I found very little resources. I didn't find a lot. There were a few theses written by grad students, and there was a few books out there, but there was not much at all that I could find that was readily available regarding genocidal actions and policies. And so I was trying to put some of these pieces together myself. And one of the turning points, and I'm actually going to share some of these graphics with you here, was I had learned that in 1862, well, I forget which one I learned first, but I came across this map at one point. And this map showed sort of the land allocations and the pathways of the Transcontinental Railway. And I knew that the Dakota and the Winnebago were up here in Minnesota. I knew that the Cheyenne and Arapaho were in Colorado. And I knew that the Apache and the Navajo were in Arizona and New Mexico. And it struck me that these were the exact routes where the Transcontinental Railway was going. If you can see them going both in the northern, the central, and the southern areas. And then I forget the exact timing of this. I found the bill that Abraham Lincoln signed in 1862. He signed two bills. One was a settlement bill that allocated 160 acres to anyone who was going north to lands. They stayed there for 5 years and paid a small registration fee. They could receive 160 acres. And then, of course, the Pacific Railway Act, which was allocating the land and the resources to complete the Transcontinental Railway. And when I saw this map, everything just kind of fell into line, right? So here we have the removal of the Dakota and Winnebago from Minnesota happening right here. This was in early 1863, beginning the hanging of the Dakota 38 was in December of 62. It was in March, April, May, June that the Winnebago and Dakota were removed from the state of Minnesota. And then we had the Sand Creek Massacre, which took place down here in 1864. And then, of course, we had the Long Walk, which took place between 1863 and 1865, right here in the Four Corners area. And of course, these are all along the paths directly of the Transcontinental Railway. And then a few months ago, when I read about the Bear River Massacre, which was the first one, the Bear River Massacre took place in January of 1863. And that massacre took place right here. This is the first route they were trying to build. It had to go north just up over the Great Salt Lake. And this is literally right in the area where they massacred the Shoshone, where Abraham Lincoln massacred Shoshone. And seeing this map, right, it just becomes crystal clear what Abraham Lincoln's doing, which is he's literally ethnically cleansing this continent. He's making way for this transcontinental railway. That one route is going from Omaha, Nebraska to San Francisco. One route is going through the Southwest, through the territory of New Mexico and Arizona, coming out near LA. And the other route is going from Duluth, Minnesota over to Seattle. And he's literally ethnically cleansing the native peoples who are right along the routes of this railway. And you see that, it's just like, oh my gosh. This guy is literally ethnically cleansing and genocide to complete manifest destiny. That's what he was doing. He was completing manifest destiny. And that's the debate we have at the end of this chapter. Not even the debate, that's what we point out. Where we even point out how our nation, and one of the reasons deconstructing the mythology of Abraham Lincoln is so absolutely difficult, is because he is the Messiah figure for the current version of Christendom, Christian empire. He's the Messiah figure. He's the version of this nation. I've learned that I have to deconstruct his mythology completely. If I leave even a of him standing, people will cling to that like their lives depended on it. I remember one of the first times when I was really with this, and I was using Twitter as kind of a way to gauge people's responses. And I tweeted something out about Abraham Lincoln's white supremacy as well as his genocide. And I kid you not, everybody who responded only responded to his white supremacy and responded by saying, well, he couldn't have been a white supremacist because he had a black friend, right? And no one responded to his genocide. They completely ignored it. And they justified Lincoln completely because, as many white people do today, especially politicians, well, I had a black friend, so I can't be racist. I have a black friend. I have a black person on my cabinet. I have a black person as my vice president, so I can't be racist, right? This is what we say, what white people say all the time. And that was Abraham Lincoln's excuse too. Yeah, I can't be racist. I'm white supremacist. I have a black friend, Frederick Douglass. And no one was even touching his genocide. And so I knew that we had to find a way to address it so people could hear it. And that's what took writing these two chapters made it so challenging. Now, I'm going to share this with you because I've had this experience numerous times and I had it today as I was preparing for this lecture or for this presentation, where I read something I wrote. I read something and it stands out to me, and I'm just like, that can't be true, right? I'm just like, no. I wrote this book several years ago, and I was reading, and again I was reading the towards the end of the chapter where I talk about Abraham Lincoln being assassinated on Good Friday. I'm like, that I must have found that in some far-reaching, obscure website, and I just got very insecure about that can't be true. So I literally had to look it up again. Right? I had to go back and remind myself, and I was like, yeah, you can't make this stuff up. I'm going to actually share with you one of the articles that looks at Abraham Lincoln being assassinated on Good Friday. And this is it. There's there's a lot of stuff out there. So, but this is just one. It's an article by Time Magazine titled "Abraham Lincoln was shot on Good Friday, and some thought it was fate." Again, because he's the Messiah figure. He's the Messiah figure. In fact, that whole end of his life was really wrapped around Holy Week, and it just added to the mythology of the heresy of Christendom. And so this has happened to me a few times. I'm just like, no, that can't. I must have got that wrong. And it's like, nope, it's absolutely there. And I just want to read some of this from the Time Magazine article. It says the calendar dates for Easter and its accompanying Holy Week change every year, but by coincidence, those dates in 2017 may be familiar ones to history buffs. This year's, and this article is written in 2017, this year's calendar dates for events like Palm Sunday and Good Friday are the same as they were in 1865, a year on which the significance of those dates was political, not just religious. As the Civil War drew to its end, the Confederate General Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant on April 9, 1865, Palm Sunday, near Appomattox Courthouse. Then, 4 days later, on April 14, Good Friday, President Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. He would die the next day. Yeah, we end this article with an understanding of how, yeah, Abraham Lincoln is the Messiah figure for the heresy known as Christian Empire. And we have to deconstruct it, and we have to deconstruct it fully, which is why Abraham Lincoln has 2 chapters in our book. And so we end this chapter kind of recapping some of the content. The victors write the history. This is dangerous. The U.S. has never lost a war. We reference Shoshone and Robert McNamara. And we kind of build the case. And right, if people knew our history, we probably could have only done this in a few sections of a chapter rather than 2 whole chapters itself. But I want to read for you kind of the conclusion of this chapter. It ends on page 161, and it goes for about a page. So I just want to read this for you. In 1492, at the start of the War of Discovery and Manifest Destiny, the estimated native population of Turtle Island, North America, ranged somewhere between 1.2 million and 20 million. For the sake of argument, we will use the median of the 2 numbers, which is 9.4 million. Then, excluding the approximately 3 to 4 million who lived in what is now Canada and Alaska, we will estimate the native population of the lower continental United States in the year 1500 to be about 6 million people. Between 1492 and 1900, the estimated population of indigenous peoples in the continental United States dropped to 237,000. This gives the War of Discovery a 96% rate of genocide, i.e. 96% of the native population was wiped out during the ongoing war. From 1800 to 1900, often referenced as the century of expansion, the indigenous population of Turtle Island was depleted from 600,000 to 237,000, giving the War of Discovery and Manifest Destiny a genocide rate of 60%. And from 1860 to 1880, a decade which included the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, the actual number in the U.S. Census of off-reservation tax-paying assimilated American Indians living in the U.S. fell from 44,000 to 25,713, a decrease of 41%. Nearly half of that drop came from the population in New Mexico, where Abraham Lincoln marched 10,000 Navajo men, women, and children who what for nearly a quarter of them was a death camp, which he approved, called Bosque Redondo. By comparison, Nazi Germany had a genocide rate for the Jewish people of 35%. It may be challenging enough to draw a comparison between Robert McNamara and Oscar Groening. It would be even more challenging to even hint at a comparison between Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler. But an objective comparison of their words, rhetoric, actions, and impact may reveal a different story. However, the most challenging comparison is that we, the United States of America, the leaders of the modern day heretical kingdom of Christendom, one exceptional nation that for centuries has been thriving, growing, and expanding, supposedly under God, are not that dissimilar from Nazi Germany. The United States of America does not hold a morally exceptional position greater than Nazi Germany. We are not more just. Our sense of equality is not any superior. Our nation has never been Christian. We have just won our wars. And therefore, for centuries, we have written our own history. And that has proven to be incredibly dangerous. That's why this is the hardest chapter to read, because we make a very convincing and compelling argument that not only is the same as Robert McNamara, and not only is Abraham Lincoln similar to Adolf Hitler, but we, the American people, are no different than Nazi Germany. We just won our wars. That's the point I wanted to make with this chapter. And it took almost a year of research and writing and finessing. And it took chapters to lay out that argument in a way that people would A, continue reading it, B, wouldn't throw the book out or slam it down, and C, would actually maybe hear us and allow themselves to be persuaded. So yeah, this is the challenge of this content. One of the things we also talked about in here, and we didn't emphasize it as much, but it's this blog post I wrote back in 2018, where, and this was another huge turning point for me, where Abraham Lincoln is credited for kind of bringing Thanksgiving into the modern era, and his proclamation of his Thanksgiving proclamation in 1863 is often referenced or even on Thanksgiving because it brought Thanksgiving into the modern era. And this was a few years ago in 2018, 2017. I think it was in 2018. I decided to read it, knowing the history that I knew. And I was appalled to see that the things he was literally giving thanks for, the things he was calling our nation to commemorate, were the fruits of the genocide he had either just committed or was actively committing when he wrote it. That's disgusting. It's sick. And that's when I'm like, I can't do Thanksgiving anymore. I had tried to continue to celebrate it because, I mean, who can't turn down an opportunity to give thanks? But when that Thanksgiving is literally Thanksgiving for the fruits of genocide, it's like, yeah, we can't participate in this. That's just disgusting. So I just shared that link again, and we were able to get some of those quotes into the book. But I think the full argument wasn't made until when I wrote this. I published this blog in November of 2018. I want to also just take you through, give you some resources of kind of my even, growth is the right word, my gaining understanding my own deconstruction of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I've written several articles that have referenced Lincoln. I've told many of the same stories over and over. But these 4 articles I want to share with you on my blog are kind of the first times I learned these new things about him or put them together in a new way. The first one was an article I wrote back in 2016. And this was about a year or so after I had first found the quote at the Lincoln Memorial that says, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it." And so that article kind of highlights that bit of understanding. Then I'm going to another article I wrote. This was in 2017, was titled "The Hanging of the Dakota 38 and the Troubling Legacy of Abraham Lincoln." And this goes a bit more in depth into kind of putting some of the pieces together. In 2019, this is 2018, January of 2018, I wrote an article called "The Abhorrent Lie of White Supremacy." And I was putting together even more fully some of my understandings of the philosophies and views of Abraham Lincoln and how that was affecting our nation. And then in 2018 February, I wrote this article where I decided to put as many pieces as I could together, called "The Historically Accurate Abraham Lincoln," and I'll put that in the comments as well. And then the last one is the one I started with, which is why I declined this opportunity for Thanksgiving. And this is what I published in November of 2018. And I shared it before in Indianz. Now I'll just share a link of it from my own blog, where it's the same article just on my blog instead of published elsewhere. And then, since then, this was 2018. So in 2020 or 2021 is when I learned about the Bear River Massacre. It's just continuing to grow and expand. So, yeah, this chapter, these 2 chapters are vitally important. And they're some of the most difficult to read. They definitely were some of the longest it took to write. Just because not only did I have to wrestle with deconstructing this legacy for myself, this mythology for myself, but I had to figure out, how do I say this in a way that people actually read it and maybe be persuaded by it. And so these chapters they're very pivotal, and some of the hardest hitting chapters in this entire book. But anyway, I wanted to ask, we have about 10 or 15 minutes left. If you have any questions about any of this content regarding Abraham Lincoln, I'm happy to try and answer some of those questions now. My friend Phil Fox helps me kind of sort through some of the questions and can help me get to see them. I'm going to just scroll through some of the comments on Facebook, or made on Facebook and YouTube, to see if there's any questions asked so far. If you ask a question, feel free to write the word "question" and then a colon and then your question after that. That way I can see if it's titled question right away, and hopefully I can highlight it a little bit quicker. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of questions asked yet. Let's see what's here at the end. Anything? Question? While you and others work to bring more awareness of the public to the public of our histories, do you think the Doctrine of Discovery could be addressed through some kind of policy if it somehow had support? Yeah, I mean, as I've dealt with this, as I've seen it more and more embedded in our foundations and in the theologies of our nation and of the church and in the policies and the foundations of our country, the problem is we can't address this with just another policy. Because it's been written into our foundations, we actually have to change our foundations. This is why when I ran for president in 2020, my first 100-day plan was to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from the foundations. If we don't address it at the foundational level, we're never going to be able to fix it. This is why I often harp on both Joe Biden as well as even President Obama, who like to think they can just reword these things, right? President Obama said, well, we now believe that we the people means all the people. President Obama may believe that. A few others may believe that. Our nation doesn't. We still make laws based on foundations where we the people means white landowning men. By the same token, Joe Biden likes to misquote the Declaration. We hold the truth to be self-evident that all men and women, he says, are created equal. I absolutely believe all men and women are created equal. All people are created equal. That's not what our foundations say. And so until we actually change it, we're not going to get there. We have to actually address it at that level. Our laws are based on the Constitution, right? This is why the laws we're passing today, why we have mass incarceration, this makes sense. In my campaign video and other places I've said, yeah, our Constitution's working. Mass incarceration, especially people of color, that's what our Constitution was designed to do. That's why we have a 13th Amendment. Women earning 50 to 70 cents per dollar that men make. Our Constitution's working. Citizens United, our Constitution's working, right? It's protecting the interests of white landowning men. The Supreme Court is not there to decide what's just and unjust, what's right and what's wrong. That's not the job of the courts. The job of the courts is to interpret and make sure things fit into the Constitution. And so when the Constitution is unjust, of course our laws are going to be unjust. The Constitution has white supremacy, racism, sexism, the doctrine of discovery embedded into it. Our laws are going to be unjust. They'll still be they'll still be legal, they'll just be unjust. And so this is why we can't just write a new policy. This is why I would say we can't even just make an amendment. This is why I actually propose we edit the Constitution. I'll share this with you. I've shared it a few times. Let me bring it up really quickly. But one of the articles I like to share is an article I use frequently with my regarding the Constitution, and it's when I was first learning how dysfunctional our Constitution was, I went through and I read the Constitution, and I was struck at how exclusive it was. And rather than writing an amendment to it, I decided to go through it with a strike-through font. And so I published an article. It's called "Struck Racism and Sexism from the Constitution of the U.S. Actually abolished slavery," and added 2 simple words articulating a value for life. And I literally went through the Constitution, and anywhere that was racist, sexist, or white supremacist, I just put a strike-through font through it. Let's just take that out. The clause in the 13th Amendment: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, wherever the party has been duly convicted, shall exist. Let's just take out that clause. Let's just say slavery doesn't exist, period. Let's not keep it legal in prison. Article 1 the 3/5 compromise. Let's just take that out. We never should have said that. All the gender-specific male pronouns, he, him, and his. Let's just take those out. Make them gender-neutral or proper nouns. Let's actually have a document where at its foundational level, with a plain text reading, states, we the people mean all the people. Even if you amend it, you have to read through an incredibly racist, sexist, white supremacist, and exclusive document to get to the footnotes at the end, which is what the amendments are, that says, oh, when we said this, it should have meant that. Well, let's just change it. This is our document, right? It's not a holy script. It's not some God-inspired divine book we can't touch. It's a document that we wrote. There's not a single corporation in business today operating off of bylaws from the 1400s, right? If they were, they'd be in courts, they'd be sued. But yet, we're running a nation based on bylaws written in the 1700s. And we're basing our land titles on papal bulls written in the 1400s. So that's where we have to address it at a foundational level. So I just shared this link in the comment. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. I hope that part is helpful. Question, is it possible to get sufficient support from the Native peoples, 500 tribes, to establish a sizable? That is a good question. One of the things that I did is I ran as an independent, and when I ran for president in 2020, I campaigned to Native peoples first. I spent all of 2019 traveling the country, going to reservations and Native lands, and speaking first and foremost to Native peoples. I truly believe if you want to be president of the United States, that's where you begin your campaign, not to the white landowning men of Iowa and New Hampshire. One of the things I learned as we were putting this campaign together is there are signature requirements in every state to get on the ballot. And if I got just the support, the overwhelming support of Indian country, we would have enough signatures in every state to have put my campaign on the ballot in all 50 states. When we looked at the voting age population of natives in every state and compared that to the signature requirements necessary. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to run as an independent instead of as a party is because it allows us to make some of these changes quicker. The two-party system is too invested, and creating a third party, I think, is going to create an institution before we get the changes made. I think we have to keep the change mechanism as lean and as streamlined as possible. So I think the idea of creating a party in the future might not be a bad idea, but I don't think that's going to result in getting the changes as quickly as we need. I think an independent candidate, like what I tried to do in 2020, is going to be the best chance of not only addressing these foundational level problems, but also doing things like what I was proposing for a national dialogue on race, gender, and class, a National Truth and Conciliation Commission. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts about what I think could be done. But I appreciate all these questions. We're doing fairly well on time. We have about 6 or 7 more minutes. I try to keep these under an hour because then I can upload them directly to Instagram, and Instagram has a 60-minute limit on videos. And just so I don't lose too much interest in people staying on more than an hour. So if you have any more questions, feel free to ask. Here's another one. Please discuss the massacre at Norridge Walk in what is now called Maine. I have not researched that massacre. So at the moment, I don't have any details on it, but thank you for making me aware of it, Gigi. I appreciate that. And I will try and look into that at some point. But yeah, at the moment, I don't know anything about that massacre. I do know there were many, many massacres that happened here on the East Coast. Where this was even before 1776. And so I know there's a lot of history that needs to be addressed there. Please outline what is needed regarding independent over a cup of coffee. Okay. What if the morality of America hinges on King Henry's right of Christian conquest through ruling Johnson v. McIntosh? Does overturning the ruling take away their immoral safety net? I'm not fully sure I understand what you're saying there, Cody. So yeah, so the challenge, and this is what's so tricky, I think, about the Doctrine of Discovery being referenced by the Supreme Court, is going back to 1823. We began to use as legal precedent for land titles discovery. And referencing the doctrine of discovery is to the fact that natives are savages, we're inhuman, we don't have rights to the land. Europeans have those rights. Those are based on these papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493. Now, the challenge is, and there are many people, and I completely respect their work and what they're doing, who are trying to get the Catholic Church to rescind the doctrine of discovery, hoping that that will make now illegal what we call our land titles here in the United States, which is not a bad way to go about it. One of the things I'm concerned about is the United States of America has demonstrated a precedent, has created a precedent where once it decides it wants to do something, it really doesn't care. Right? This is going back. We have veto power in not NATO, but in I don't know why I can't think of the word right now. Anyway, but we have veto power in the UN, the United Nations. And so this is where, when the statement on the rights of indigenous peoples came up, the U.S. just declined to sign. There's a lot of indigenous peoples who are trying to address injustices against by the United States by going through the UN. But the UN, A, it has veto power there, and B, it has enough weapons and its military to do whatever it pleases. And so while I would love to see the Catholic Church rescind the doctrine of discovery, I'm not fully confident that that is going to result in the U.S. changing its legal precedent for land titles. I think it could be done in conjunction if the U.S. decided to incorporate in cooperation with the Catholic Church, they rescind their papal bulls and we remove it from our legal precedent for land titles. I think that's possible. I don't think if only the Catholic Church does it, that would change a whole lot in the way that we work land titles out right now. That's my guess. But this is why I decided to run for president, because I wanted to make these changes. And I've studied enough history to know that if the U.S. wants to do something, it generally doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks. It will do what it wants to do. And so I thought, well, we should probably try to change what the U.S. wants to do then, which is why I ran for president 2020 and why I'm considering running again in the future. But these are good questions. I appreciate that. I'm about out of time here, but if you have questions that you want to submit, I welcome you to submit them to me over social media or on my website. And if you would like to purchase a signed copy of the book, there are several places in this live stream, and I'll put them in the comment section one more time right now. We do have signed copies of the book for sale on my website, and you can purchase those as well, and I welcome you to do so. We have 2 more chapters and then the conclusion left, so I think we have 3 more sessions left of this book study, but I'm looking forward to next week, and thank you all for joining me. I really enjoy these times every Friday, so I can't have my relatives. I hope that you have a great day. Walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Ahiahat and Hakonet.